The world operated on iron discipline and calculated returns. Eleanor Croft, CEO of Croft Global Corporation, didn't check the time, she dictated it. Inside the pristine, hypermodern cabin of her private jet, cold blue LED light washed over her tailored charcoal suit. Outside the rain-streaked window, the runway blurred into a smear of neon light. She swiped through digital assets on a sleek tablet with icy precision. A billion-dollar merger was scheduled for noon in a neighboring state. First, a routine stop at First Capital Bank. A signature, a handshake. Efficiency was her religion. She had no idea her entire world order was about to be liquidated. The private jet gave way to the brutalist, towering architecture of First Capital Bank. Rain-slicked glass doors hissed open as Eleanor stepped into the main lobby, flanked by an entourage of blurred security details. The interior was a cavern of polished white marble and warm gold accent lighting, smelling faintly of expensive espresso and crisp paperwork. Business owners bartered in hushed tones near the teller lines. To Eleanor, the people around her were merely background noise, data points in a broader market. Then, her eyes flicked to the back row of benches. He didn't belong. His faded canvas jacket was stained with dark motor oil, his heavy work boots caked in dried gray dust. His hands were raw, calloused, and deeply ingrained with grease from brutal physical labor. Beside him sat a 7-year-old girl, completely detached from the world, coloring a brilliant red notebook while clutching a scruffy, faded teddy bear. Eleanor felt a fleeting spark of corporate judgment. An ordinary working-class father. She looked away. But Eleanor hadn't built an empire by being blind. She looked back. The man wasn't looking at a phone. His posture was military straight, rigid as iron. His eyes moved in a rhythmic, terrifyingly systematic pattern. Left corner security camera. Blind spot near the vault. Trajectory to the western emergency exit. The reflection of the guard's holster in the polished marble floor. A total tactical scan of the room. When he finished, his hardened face instantly melted into a warm, gentle smile as he patted his daughter's head. Before Eleanor could process the anomaly, the atmosphere shattered. The massive glass entrance didn't just open, it exploded inward. Crystalline shards rained across the marble floor like ice under a muzzle flash. 4 masked gunmen, draped in matte black tactical gear, body armor, and heavy balaclavas, flooded the lobby with rhythmic, lethal speed. Nobody move. Face down. The lead robber fired a single, deafening round into the ceiling. Plaster dust exploded downward, cutting through the gold light beams in hazy sheets. Terrified screams tore through the air. The warm bank lighting instantly died, replaced by the violent, pulsing crimson of the building's emergency alarm system. Eleanor's heart hammered violently against her ribs. Adrenaline spiking, she slid behind a massive, thick marble pillar, her hands trembling as she pressed her back against the stone. Through the haze of plaster dust and the strobe of deep red emergency lights, Eleanor looked across the room. While the rest of the world was losing its mind, the mechanic didn't even flinch. He didn't look at the guns. He didn't look at the doors. He dropped to one knee, putting his back to the wall, and placed a single heavy hand on his daughter's shoulder. His face was a mask of cold, absolute focus. Without raising his voice, he whispered 2 words, Protocol Alpha. The little girl didn't cry. She didn't freeze. With mechanical precision, she slid beneath a heavy metal customer service desk, pulling her knees tightly to her chest, her small hands firmly gripping the teddy bear. She became invisible. Eleanor watched in pure disbelief. Children panic. Children scream. This little girl was executing a drilled maneuver. A robber caught the blur of motion. He whipped his automatic rifle around, the cold steel barrel pointing directly at the father's chest. Hey, hands where I can see them, trash. The mechanic raised his hands. The movement was deliberately slow, fluid, and unthreatening. Staying calm, he said. His voice didn't possess a tremor of fear, anger, or defiance. It was chillingly level, the tone of an apex predator evaluating a lesser threat. The gunman blinked behind his mask, visibly unnerved by the absolute lack of panic. Beside them, An elderly customer trapped on the floor began to wheeze violently, clutching his chest. "My inhaler!" the old man gasped. The guard whipped his rifle toward the elderly man's head, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I said shut up and don't move. If he stops breathing, he dies." The mechanic's voice cut through the ambient panic like a razor blade. "I don't care," the robber snarled, his barrel shaking slightly. The mechanic looked the gunman dead in the eye holes of his tactical mask, his gaze bathed in the alternating pulse of red and blue light. "You should. If he dies, this changes from an asset seizure to a federal murder charge. Your crew loses their leverage. The tactical teams outside stop negotiating and breach with gas. Let me get his medicine, and I'll keep this lobby dead quiet for you." The logic was absolute. It was operational fact. The gunman hesitated, the barrel lowering an inch. 30 seconds, he growled. With calculated, frictionless movements, the mechanic reached into the old man's coat pocket, retrieved the plastic inhaler, and smoothly administered the dose. As the old man's breathing stabilized, the mechanic looked back up at the masked man. "See? No trouble." From behind her pillar, Eleanor's mind raced. This wasn't a mechanic. This was an operator who knew exactly how to psychologically dismantle an armed threat. Suddenly, a young teller broke. Overwhelmed by fear, she bolted toward the rear exit hallway. A robber panicked, firing a wild warning shot that ricocheted off the concrete vault wall with a piercing metallic ping. "Get her! Don't let her touch the alarm," the leader barked. Two of the gunmen immediately broke formation, sprinting down the hallway after the teller. The perimeter was compromised. The tight tactical net they had established was gone. Now, only one nervous, isolated gunman remained to guard the entire lobby pool. The mechanic's eyes flared, shifting into an entirely different state of consciousness. He looked down beneath the desk. His 7-year-old daughter met his gaze and gave him a microscopic, definitive nod. Eleanor held her breath. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of cordite and copper. She knew the next 3 seconds would be a slaughter. The exact microsecond the remaining guard turned his head to check the hallway, the mechanic struck. It wasn't a movie brawl, it was brutal, hyper-efficient kinetic violence. He closed the distance in a heartbeat. His left hand clamped onto the guard's weapon wrist, twisting the anatomy with a sickening pop to direct the rifle's barrel harmlessly toward the high ceiling. Simultaneously, the mechanic stepped inside the guard's guard and drove his entire body weight, a solid shoulder, directly into the man's sternum. The air exploded from the guard's lungs as his rifle clattered away across the polished marble floor. Hearing the impact from the corridor, the lead robber rounded the corner, raising his weapon. "Get down," the mechanic roared. Eleanor's corporate survival instincts took over. She reached out, grabbed 2 frozen, terrified customers nearby, and violently yanked them down behind the thick, solid marble teller counter. A split second later, a hail of automatic gunfire tore through the air, chewing into the upper pillars and shattering what remained of the drywall. Using the marble counter for absolute cover, the mechanic slid across the slick floor toward the dropped weapon. In a blur of hyper-detailed motion that looked like a choreographed dance, his calloused, grease-stained hands grabbed the weapon. In one fluid, practiced motion, his thumb slapped the magazine release, the black polymer clip dropping to the floor. His other hand racked the bolt, ejecting the live brass chambered round into the air, where it caught a glint of deep cyan light. He hurled the useless rifle and the magazine in completely opposite directions. He had neutralized the weapon in less than a second. The mechanic stood up to his full height. He was completely unarmed, his dusty jacket torn, but he radiated a terrifying, unshakable authority. The remaining 2 robbers ran back into the lobby, weapons raised, but stopped dead in their tracks. Outside, a wall of blinding, flashing red and blue police strobes and heavy searchlights cut through the shattered glass doors, filling the smoky bank lobby with a chaotic, brilliant glare. The mechanic looked at the remaining criminals. His voice was dead calm. "It's over. Look behind you. Don't make a bad day worse." The criminals looked at the armed tactical police units already breaching the perimeter, then down at their broken, groaning teammate on the floor. Realizing they were completely outmatched, They threw their rifles onto the marble and raised their hands. As the deafening screech of sirens filled the street and heavily armed SWAT teams flooded the lobby, the heavy grip of terror finally lifted. Eleanor stepped out from behind the marble counter, her expensive suit covered in white plaster dust and debris, her heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. She walked directly toward the back of the room. The mechanic was already back on one knee. The killer was gone, only the father remained. He gently used a rough, calloused thumb to wipe a speck of white plaster dust off his daughter's cheek. The little girl threw her small arms tightly around his neck, burying her face into his worn canvas jacket. "I knew you'd keep everyone safe, Daddy," she whispered softly. The mechanic smiled, the cold steel in his eyes instantly melting into a soft, warm light. "I promised I would, didn't I?" Eleanor stood before them, completely humbled. Her wealth, her titles, her power, they meant nothing in the shadow of the man standing in front of her. "I've managed thousands of people across the globe," she said softly, her voice filled with a profound, newfound respect. "But I have never seen that level of precision. That kind of courage. Who are you?" The father stood up, calmly adjusting his grease-stained jacket. He looked down at his daughter, who was safely holding his hand. "Years ago, I commanded an elite special operations team. I lived in the dark. But when I lost my wife, I looked at my girl and realized something. She doesn't need a legendary soldier. She just needs a dad. So I walked away. Now I just fix engines." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Today, you were both." A week later, the city hosted an elegant commendation ceremony inside a massive, gold-lit auditorium. Eleanor stood at the polished podium in a deep velvet gown, addressing a massive crowd of city officials and media. But she didn't talk about her business, corporate leadership, or the police force. Her eyes were locked entirely on the very back row of the auditorium. Sitting in the dim purple shadow of the exit light was a man in a simple, unpretentious dark suit, quietly holding his daughter's hand. When a reporter later caught the mechanic outside and asked why a simple working man would risk his life for a room full of strangers, the man simply looked down at his little girl and smiled. "Children don't learn courage from our wealth, our titles, or our words," he said quietly. "They learn it from our choices." Eleanor watched them walk away, disappearing into the bustling neon blur of the city crowd. She had spent her entire life believing that power was defined by the stock market, net worth, and leverage. But as she watched the dusty mechanic disappear into the rain, she finally understood the ultimate truth. The greatest heroes among us are often the ones who have the absolute power to destroy, but choose instead to quietly protect.